Okay. Hello, everybody. It is Jane Rachel, and I am so excited because I'm about to facilitate what I think is the first ever group panel discussion on maladaptive daydreaming, also known as MDD, which I promise we are going to explain in full detail what that means in a few minutes. It is something that I've experienced from early childhood to my mid 20s, and my experiences are described in an article on theatlantic.com as well as the overcomingtogether.com websites. And after I co-wrote the article in the Atlantic, I heard from people from all over the globe who felt the same way and felt that this was the first time that they saw their experiences in writing and they were begging to hear more. But since it's been over 20, almost 25 years since I've dealt with maladaptive daydreaming, I thought it was important to talk to some people who've got more closer experiences with it and are even dealing with it right now. My goal is that if there is anybody out there today who's got maladaptive daydreaming, that they can see this discussion and know that they're not alone, because they are not alone. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of really, I think, highly creative, intelligent people who struggle with this. I'm also hoping that people with MDD can show it to people that they love, their friends, their family, maybe their therapist, to give them some sort of insight into what this is. Because to be honest, if you haven't experienced it yourself, it's hard to understand that daydreaming could be a problem. And another reason that I want to do this, or that all of us, the panelists, want to do this, is we want to raise awareness because we want the mental health community to understand that this is a real disorder that is being currently just under study by someone named Dr. Ellie Silmer and many other researchers, but it really needs to get recognized as a real psychological condition. Lastly, I just want to say when I was a young person, I spent hours and hours looking for someone who daydreamed the same way I did or struggled with these issues. I searched card catalogs in the library because it was before computers and psychological databases. And I always came up empty handed. I felt like I was the only one on the planet with this. Nowadays, all you have to do is type in maladaptive daydreaming into your search bar and you will come up with hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have MDD. And I'm really fortunate and grateful that I've got three like highly articulate people who are willing to share their experiences to help others. Um, we're gonna each tell a little bit about our story, about what MDD means to them, how it affects their life, how it started. We're going to start with Karishma, who is a software designer and is offered to share her story. She also has a website, I believe, Karishma. What is the name of your blog?
Trapped in daydreams?
Trapped in Daydreaming. So I encourage everybody to check that out after this discussion. And I'm really grateful to have Charisma here with us today. She's very articulate. I spent a while speaking with her before about the topic. So, Charisma, before we get to your story, would you be able to just define for the viewers what is maladaptive daydreaming and how is it different from regular daydreaming?
So, maladaptive daydreaming is basically a psychiatric condition. It's not, part of the DSM as you mentioned, but it's basically a condition in which the patients have extremely vivid daydreams. So, everybody daydreams in their day-to-day life, but in maladaptive daydreaming, the daydreams are very vivid. They last for a very long time. They're triggered by real life events, so like music, a conversation, or a physical stimulus, and it can distract them from their real life for hours because the daydreaming experience is very rewarding. It's a So it's something that people can get trapped in, and it can interfere with your sleep, your work, your day-to-day care, food, when do you eat, all sorts of regular functioning. So it's a rewarding experience that then eventually leads to extreme discomfort in everyday life.
And how is it? Is it different from regular daydreaming just in the amount of time it takes, or how vivid is it? How, like, what makes it different from regular daydreaming?
So one thing is that maladaptive daydreaming is more vivid. For most people that have reported it, they tend to, create extremely intricate worlds, almost novel length worlds. It could be related to real life or it could be completely fantasy. But the idea is that extremely, long length daydreams. They're not your everyday, just, random. And the other thing is that they last for a very long time. And a lot of people try to stimulate their daydreams by kinesthetically moving around, or they'll voice it, or they'll perform a lot of physical actions to maintain that daydream and that immersion.
What is kinesthetic? What
Kinesthetic means physical, so it's a physical stimulus.
like so for example, as a child I would pace in circles, right?
Right.
Other people jog, other people swing or do hand motions. And I just
Uh,
want to differentiate though, when we talk about hard to control, that doesn't mean a hallucination, right? It's
no, no, no.
different. Okay.
It's not a psychosis or hallucination, like you said. It's something that the person controls. It's just extremely rewarding, so people have a compulsion to go back to it. Like they want to keep, like if there's a video game that you're addicted to and you want to keep going back to it, it's kind of like that. You have this impulse to want to keep daydreaming, even though you know you shouldn't.
Yeah, someone asked me once, I think a therapist or someone was like, is this coming into your head? Like, what do you mean you can't control it? Like, is it
Mm.
coming into your head? And I was like, no, it's kind of like if there's a hot fudge sundae in front of me and I'm on a diet, right? Like, I technically can control it, but
Right.
right, I want to do it so badly that I end up
Right. Right. Like if there's a big plate of cookies, it's like I know I shouldn't eat it, but I'll finish the whole thing. That
exactly.
kind of thing. Yep.
So can you tell us, Krishna, a little bit about like what MDD means to you, like how it affected your life? When did it start? That
So I've been maladaptive daydreaming honestly since as long as I can remember, but my first one I can like distinctly remember what I daydreamed and that it was maladaptive was when I was 8. I used to watch this TV show Beyblade, and I used to daydream as a character that I created inside that show because there wasn't a strong female character in that show, and then kind of just spiraled out of there into something that I would spend hours doing, and then not sleep on time or not eat on time, things like that.
and were you pacing in circles or could
Well,
you?
it depends. I think over the years I have figured out in a way to do it without pacing, but usually what I would do is I would lock my room so that nobody can watch me, and then I would run around and pace. I guess I don't like using the word pacing mainly because it's a lot more physical than that. Like I would run more. But yes, I would pace around in my room, and then sometimes my mom would come in and I had to stop in mid positions because I didn't want anyone to see. It was very embarrassing for me
And
as a kid.
why do you think, why were you embarrassed? Like, why did you not want your mom to know?
Well, part of it was I think it was personal. I didn't want anybody to know I was making these daydreams. It was very like private. But at the same time, I think part of it was I even then I knew this wasn't normal. I knew that people didn't do this and I felt weird for doing it. I felt like there was something wrong with me and that I was, crazy.
But
And I
uh,
didn't want anybody to see that.
other than the fact that it felt different, like,
Hmm.
is there something really problematic? I mean, honestly, it sounds like fun, right? So,
Right.
and other kids might spend hours playing video games or watching TV. So,
Hmm.
what makes this maladaptive? Like,
I think
why? Yeah,
I kind of alluded to it. Like you said, children, create fantasy characters and that's perfectly healthy. We don't want to, problematize that. But what makes this unhealthy is that and even today what I would do is like I said, I won't sleep on time. So basically I will spend hours maladaptive daydreaming even when I'm feeling sleepy, even when my eyes are drooping because it's just so rewarding for me that I won't sleep until 2 a.m., 3 a.m. and then next day I have to wake up at 8 for work. So I'm sleep deprived constantly. The other thing is I won't eat on time because I am so busy daydreaming that I'm not taking care of food prep or ordering food. I'm, getting constantly distracted by this activity. Um,
you,
and so that physically degrades my regular health.
does it affect your life, like as far as your today, as far as social life or in the past academics or?
So I know that other people in the community have experienced like they can't interact socially with people. Personally, doesn't affect me in the sense that I do have good social relations, but it affects me in that a lot of times I have to convince myself to even go hang out with a lot of friends because I would rather sit home and daydream. At least in that respect, I'm usually able to convince myself to just leave my house and hang out with them. But it does add a barrier there where I have to physically force myself. And sometimes, I don't win that battle.
And do your daydreams look like the same? Like a lot, again, everybody daydreams. Like
Right, right.
you can have daydreams of winning the lottery, of marrying the person of your dreams, of getting a new job. But these daydreams are different. Do you have
Yes.
can you tell me just a little bit? Is it like a group of people? Is it always the same people? Are they fictional?
So I personally have a distinction between my normal daydreams and the ones that are maladaptive or immersive. And the immersive ones have one different quality to them. Two, they're part of a different fantasy world that I have created for myself with different characters and all that. Like there's a lot of consistency in there. And those are triggered by the music or, video clips, things like that. Whereas my normal daydreams, usually if I'm just thinking about, say, my boss, saying, "Hey, you did a really good job on that project. I'm going to give you a promotion," something like that, I would that would be very casual. I wouldn't have to pace around for it. Doesn't need music to be triggered. It would be over in 10 minutes.
Right.
But this one, it one it can last as long as I make it last. And second is it is very like it's its own world that I've created in my head. And it's like I'm going back to it whenever I get a chance.
And kind of the same character? Are you in it? Are they? Or
Well, it's some of the characters are same, some of the characters change as I grow up, but in the day-to-day life, they pretty much stay the same. So
And what do you think you're getting out of it? That's my last question. But like, is it like watching a great TV show, or is it even better? What?
I I don't think it's about getting like because I do watch shows, I do watch TV, so it's not the same level of enjoyment. I think it is more about emotional release for me, like emotions I can't express in my everyday life. Anger is a big one. You can't get angry with people that easily in your real life because respect and boundaries. But
Yeah.
in my fantasy world, I can be as angry, as violent I need to, and nobody's gonna, get hurt or feel bad or get offended or anything.
And do you ever find yourself crying? I know I did.
Oh
Like,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
feel all of the emotions my characters do, and it's like even though it's not happening to me, it's very like emotionally immersive, or like I feel all of it.
So thank you for sharing. Before we turn to Levi, I do want to point out though that people can have these immersive daydreamings, and it does not mean that it's maladaptive. So the definition of maladaptive daydreaming means it does have to interfere with your life in some way or another. And the reason that's a point that's really important to me is that I do get emails from some people who say, I've daydreamed like this all my life. I never knew it was a problem. And now I'm freaking out that I may have a psychological disorder. No, if you daydream in this way and you find it enjoyable and it's not interfering with your life, it's not a problem, right? If you didn't think it was a problem before you heard the term, then it's not a problem. Same thing I'm hearing from a lot of parents who see their kids pacing in circles. And when they ask the child what they're doing, the child says, making stories up in my head. And the parents are like, oh my God, this child now has maladaptive daydreaming. Again, it's only a problem. And I have two people in my own family who daydream in this immersive fashion, and they love it. They don't think it's a problem at all. One, watches her favorite TV show, I think Shameless, a half hour before she goes to bed, but it relaxes her and puts her to sleep. If I were to watch, prior in my younger days, if I were to watch my favorite TV show in my head for a half hour before I went to bed, just like you, Charisma, I would have been up all night, right? And then I wouldn't in the morning, I'd be frustrated when I had to go to school because I'd want to keep daydreaming. And every single second of the day, I'd be like looking for a moment to go back to my daydreaming. But, for my niece was able to keep it limited period of time. I don't think that's a problem at all. And I think there are a lot of artists out there, writers, actors, who use this type of imagination to fuel creativity. So I just want to be clear that unless, the definition of maladaptive means it's interfering in your life in some way. So now I'm going to turn to Levi. Thank you. I'm so happy to have him. Yeah, I'm so happy to have all of you. He is a multimedia artist. He's also experienced maladaptive daydreaming and also has his own website. Tell me again the name of the blog, Levi. That is Mad Art,
It's
right? Is that it?
yeah, on YouTube.
Yeah, Mad
Yeah.
Art on YouTube. So I encourage everybody to check that out again after this panel. And Levi, thank you so much for joining us. And just tell us a little bit about what MDD means to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so Maladaptive Daydreaming, like Karishma said, I also grew up thinking there was just something wrong with me. I've been daydreaming since I think at around 5 or 6 years old. I do remember that my daydream started when I got a CD player, when I was first introduced to music. And before that, I had rhythmic movement disorder where I would get on my hands and knees or my elbows and knees, and I would like rock my entire body forwards and backwards. And that I've had since I can remember. So yeah, that's
When
where
you
it
were
sort of
doing that,
started.
were you daydreaming when you were rocking back and forth?
Not before I had music. Then that was just I would sort of I would be in the middle of the night. I would just feel like one of my parents pressing me down, and I would sort of realize, oh, I'm doing this thing. I didn't even know I was doing it, but there, as far as I can remember, I didn't experience daydreaming before I had access to music. And as soon as I got the access to the CDs and I could sort of pick which songs would relate to my emotions or what I would want to daydream about or the emotion that I would want to create in my head, that's when my daydreams really started kicking off. And yeah, it's mostly been interfering in, I'd say, studies. So during school when I was growing up, it was just absolute hell to stay focused. It would take a few minutes for me to just sort of zone out. And yeah, even recently with studying for medical stuff, I have a really difficult time snapping things, and then lecturers would have to re-repeat what they said to me alone. And it feels like I'm just extremely slow in life because I need to keep having things repeated to me. And another thing also is that it definitely interferes with work for me. I am very incapable of keeping a job for more than a few weeks. I'd probably say days or weeks. I get frustrated very, very quickly. And then when I get frustrated, I don't want to do it. And then I just do really bad work. And it's very difficult to force myself to actually put all of my time and energy into something that I just don't care about. So,
And
yeah,
do you think that's because of the daydreaming, or do you think the daydreaming is kind of a coping mechanism to deal with that, or does the daydreaming cause that? Does that make sense?
I definitely
Or
think that I want to blame maladaptive daydreaming for that because I feel like what's happening in my mind is so much more interesting than what's happening in real life. Like the things that I have to focus on in real life is just not as interesting as the things that my daydreaming is telling me I could be doing. And yeah, that's just one of the main things is that my daydreaming is it's really frustrating to me because it's constantly reminding me of what I could do or what I could be or you know what I should be doing. So yeah, it's caused a lot of stuff for me.
and and does your daydreaming look similar to Charisma's? Like, is there a cast of characters, or are you in it, or what's like? Can you just tell me a little bit like about the general? Like, is
Yeah,
seeing
so
people over? Yeah.
yeah. So I do have myself as the main character, sort of, and I do have an entire, a world or a paracosm, as it's called, and I have a ton of characters. Usually, for me, I have this very sort of hyperfixation on medical professionals, so like doctor characters or scientist characters. And yeah, so to them, the way I explained it to my therapist is that I have this round table of characters in my mind, and each character sort of represents something of me, like an emotion or something. But at the end of the day, I still daydream about interacting with them and sort of being important to them. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Definitely. I mean, it completely makes sense to me because I experienced. I do think though it might be hard again for people who've never experienced this to really understand what we're talking about. And some of that I think is the term daydream because everybody daydreams, but I do think that what we do, or what I used to do, is much more in depth, right? We keep coming back to the same characters, and it's taking up more of our time. So yeah. Okay, I want to go back to both of those points in a second, but first let's say hello to Kristen. And thank you, Kristen, who is a mom of an amazing 7-year-old boy, and also I think also runs a chat room on MBD as well.
Yeah, I'm like everywhere in the community. I'm a mod on the Reddit, on Daydream in Blue, on Amino. I run a Tumblr blog. I run the Discord.
Yes. And I think
And a YouTube channel.
and
a YouTube
and
channel.
a YouTube channel. So I mean, I can't say it enough how grateful I am to all of you because when I was young, there was none of that. So I think it really does help people to see that there are other people out there with it. So thank you all for everything that you do in the community. So Kristen, same questions for you. Like, what does MDD mean to you? Why? How has it affected your life? And as one psychologist said to me once, like I don't know, like other people watch TV, like, well, what's the big deal? Like, why should we be paying attention to this disorder? So just if you could tell us a little bit about your story and why you think MDD is important.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, people watch TV, but they don't watch it for days at a time. That would be a problem no matter who you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, same as the other two. Like I've been daydreaming like this as long as I can remember. I don't know exactly when it flipped to maladaptive. Like it was, I guess, a subtle progression. And it is hard to tell in kids because imagination is normal in children.
Yeah.
But definitely by high school. And I would say high school was even like the worst years. High school was the years where it would be days long. Like I don't even know how to just say like 36-hour long daydream binges. Like that's.
So, but I'm gonna ask you the same question people ask me. So, I mean, you were going to school, right? Were you in bed, or did you actually go to school on those 36 hours?
Oh yeah, no. So I was a fantastic student, but what I would do is I would pack all my work. I would do my schoolwork in the time between classes, in study periods, get extra passes to the library, on the school bus, anywhere but home. Because as soon as I got home, I went to my bedroom and that was it. I didn't come out until I absolutely had to, which was either to catch the school bus the next day, or I would just, because I don't pace. I mean, I actually don't really move at all. I don't have any of those repetitive movements. So I would just stay in bed all weekend, or all the vacation or whatever, if I didn't have to be somewhere.
And if you had the choice between going out with friends or daydreaming, which would you pick?
Back then, now yeah, I push myself into social situations, but back then, yeah, I would choose daydreaming over almost anything. And that, those are the years where you're supposed to be building social skills. And I feel like I missed out on all that. I'm really awkward.
No, I mean, you're so articulate about this topic, and I'm sure about everything. What do you think? What was it about the daydreaming that made you want to do that more than you wanted to be with your friends? It was just more interesting, or like what? Any thought? I know it's a hard question, but any?
Yeah, that's such a hard question. I don't even know if I can explain it. It's just where you're supposed to be. I didn't want to leave, and leaving, especially after a long binge, feels weird. Like the world doesn't look real. It looks like a painting, and it's just like you're out of place.
Yeah. So can you also, same question I asked Karishma and Levi, was it the same characters? Like what is so compelling, like for someone who doesn't experience it, what is so compelling about these daydream worlds that we don't want to leave?
Yeah, I can't speak to anyone else's, but mine though, I've had the same world for 30 years, the same characters. It started as a little group and they've grown with me. They had children. They're at the age where their children are starting to have children, and I'm following all their stories. But they're not. I know they're not people, but it really feels like I grew up with them, I've got married with them. I had children with them, like.
Did you create them? Are they from fiction, or like where did they come from?
Almost all of mine are like original characters. A few of them I like grabbed from other places, but yeah, most of them are just, I'm kind of a world builder. So like, and it's got lore, it's got religion, it's got politics and trade unions and
Wow.
you know
So, and I could see how it would be hard to move, like it'd be hard to leave that, right? But again, a doctor would say to me, well, it's hard to put down a good book, but you do it. But the pull, I think, is more intense, right? Because it's in your own mind, right?
Yeah, it's sure it's hard to put down a good book, but you're not making career choices based on your reading habits.
And
And I would turn down promotions because I just couldn't handle like changing my lifestyle. Like I don't want more responsibility. That means more hours. I need to go home. Like I need to lay in bed for the next 6 hours.
wow. And so you've just created all, so I mean, it's interesting because I think there's some similarities among us, but there's some differences. Like I was never creative enough to make my own characters. So I would take characters from TV shows. Like I didn't like the way it started that simply. I didn't like the way a show ended. So I would make my own ending. And then all of a sudden I would make my own plot. And then all of a sudden I'd add new characters and I would just be spending all of this time in my head. But it sounds like you've created all of your own characters. So that's pretty
Yeah.
impressive.
Creative, though, I don't know. I don't know if I would call it creative because creative implies some sort of like directed action, and that's not what I'm doing. I'm watching it unfold. I mean, sure, yeah, my mind is creating it somehow, but I'm not actively aware of how or directing it or anything like that.
But it's not a hallucination. Like you are in charge, right, of what is created, like the direction you want to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what the experience of a hallucination is. I've never had one. This is definitely all daydreams.
Right.
I,
With,
well, yeah, and like you said, daydream's not even a very good word because I have normal daydreams and
yeah.
it's not the same.
I mean, I honestly think that the term daydreaming is kind of hurts the effort to get this recognized. I mean, I told my parents when I was 17 and they just laughed. They're like, who doesn't daydream? But years later, my father saw some of the stuff on the internet of the details. He's like, oh my God, this is definitely a disorder. And I was like, wait, I thought 20 years this is disorder. He's like, I didn't know you were doing this. So I think when people hear the word daydream, it's just innocuous. But clearly, if we're living with these characters in our heads, it's more than daydreaming. So, Kristen, it sounds like the biggest area it's affected you both the social area, but also for a while work too, right? Because you prefer the daydreaming to it.
Oh yeah, it evolves. Like for a while it was my career that it was affecting. But now I'm a stay-at-home mom, and it's hitting me in different ways. And the biggest way is, when I have my son, you can't spend 36 hours in bed. That's neglect. So I wanted to get better. So that's when I really got involved in the community, and I started like trying to curb it. And what I found was anger. I guess it's withdrawal, maybe some sort of withdrawal type symptom. Like as I was curbing it, um, or in a daydream, when he comes up, he's like, I need some juice. And I'm just like, I want to snap at him. I'm like, but I can't get mad at him because I was staring at a wall and he interrupted me. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
not good.
So that kind of leads my next question for everyone. What have I mean, a lot of people. I'm gonna ask questions that I know are frustrating, and I know that they're frustrating because when people ask them to me, I wanted to like scream at them. But I'm trying to keep in mind that some people watching this like haven't experienced it, so they don't know. So the number one question I used to get after like, what's the big deal? Like, why is it any different than watching TV? I'd get, well, if you like, why don't you just stop it? So like what have we done to try to curb it, and how come it's not that easy, right? It's because I found I've tried a million things and I couldn't stop it. So anybody thoughts on what have
I
we
mean,
tried to stop it?
I can go first if that's okay. But for me, like I think Dimmer mentioned, anger is a big one. I think there was a few weeks. I think I did go a bit extreme there, where for a few weeks, I think I lasted almost a month. I didn't do any of the immersive daydream. I allowed myself to do the normal daydreams because I can tell the difference pretty easily. But
Yeah.
I wasn't like the moment I would get into immersive, I would immediately stop myself. And I tried that for a month almost, and I was angry at everybody all the time. I would, and I think at one point I even shouted at my mother, which was, and she was very understanding, and she was like, oh, you're just going through a rough time, it's okay. And I'm very happy that people were understanding, but I could feel my frustration boiling over, and I almost once shouted at my boss. Luckily I didn't, but I almost did, and he didn't do anything, it wasn't his fault. But and I realized that I can't keep going like this, otherwise I'm going to ruin my personal relationships, my professional relationships. So then I had to be like, okay, I need to moderate this somehow. And I still haven't figured it out. And the other thing is, why don't I just stop? Because it's like, at least for me, there's just way too many triggers. Music will trigger me, TV shows will trigger me, a book will trigger me. Anything that, makes me imagine things will trigger me, and that could be literally anything.
Yeah.
So it's like when there's so many traps everywhere, you can't isolate yourself. This isn't, like you said, the cookie example, I can't just stop buying cookies.
It's in your head.
So yeah, I mean that's for me at least.
What I would tell people is that it was just like there was a TV show and they had 24/7.
Mm,
And I would pay attention, if I was in a conversation one-on-one, I would pay attention to the conversation. Like when I had to pay attention to real life, I did, but it was
mm-hmm,
always in the background, just waiting for the second, like, I was in high school and I'd ask my friends a long question about like their crush at the moment. And because I knew they would take a long time to answer it, so I could go back to my story. Like I was always on alert for
right.
a story. And I did notice, so some people mentioned patience, pacing. Kristen, I think you said you didn't need to pace. For me, I needed to pace or move or whatever as a child. And I kind of feel like that period wasn't so bad because I did it for limited time. But I
Mm,
eventually learned how to do it without pacing. So then I could be doing it all day long from like the beginning of the day. Any second that I got a free moment, I'd go back to it and I'd be like, okay, it's just going to be a second, 2 minutes while I'm walking to class. But then I get to
yeah.
class and I'll be like the first 5 minutes. And then before I knew it, like the end of the class was over. Um, yeah,
I relate. I think it definitely got worse for me as soon as I figured out how to do it without pacing. I still prefer pacing, but like the fact that I can do it without gives me way more luxury because then I can do it whenever.
I do want to go back to the question. I want to hear Levi and Kristen's thoughts about trying to stop. But just curious also about the pacing. I can't answer why, like, what the pacing. I could never figure out like why the pacing made the daydreaming better. Does anyone know? It's just something I did. But like, can anyone explain? Kristen, you didn't pace, but I think Levi and Krishma, you did. Any thoughts about what the pacing and daydream, like, what do they have to do with each other?
Oh.
Well, for me, I think it's just the pacing adds. It's like a repetitive thing. I can't really explain it either, but for me, I recently noticed that when I walk to the store, when I walk there, and when I walk back, my mind just goes, and it's so difficult for me to control it because I'm so worried that I'm going to make facial expressions or something like that. But for some reason, it's that repetitive movement that sort of
Yeah,
it's sort of like involuntarily tapping your fingers to music or something like
yeah,
that, if that makes sense.
yeah.
For me at least.
Or just for whatever reason, it's easier for people who don't have this to daydream in a car when it's moving than when it stops. And we just don't know why.
I mean, for somebody like me who does both but prefers pacing, I think for me it's a way to feel more like I'm in that world. Like it's a way to get that extra level of immersion, like, physical rather than just here.
Yeah,
Uh, but I mean, other than that, like Levi said, I can't. I just do it.
kind of shut that, maybe helps shut out the
Right. Like
outside
it
world or whatever.
isolates you from the world somehow.
Levi, you mentioned spaces. Can you explain what do you mean by that when you
So basically, for me, when I'm in my daydreams, I'm talking to other people or to characters, and I'm, either laughing or I'm being emotional or I'm being angry or sad or whatnot. And it's it's very difficult to. It's like when you're thinking of a joke or you're remembering a joke, and then you just sort of laugh at it. You cannot really stop yourself from laughing. It's really funny, and I think
Yeah.
that is how it works with daydreams as well. But for us, it's like it's not just the joke part; it's every emotion. So if I have a problem with frowning when when I'm in a daydream and I'm in a a tough situation or whatever you want to call it, then I tend to frown and I look really, really angry to people. But I'm not really angry. I'm just thinking about being angry.
Yeah. I
So
found,
yeah.
I mean, a lot. So in addition to my own experiences as a child and young adult, I've done some research on the topic. I've published a few articles. Um, and a lot of people do tend to, like, if something funny happens, you laugh, or something sad happens, you cry. So to an outsider, or they'd be looking at you, what is this person, reacting to? And that's just one of those things that happen. I'd like to get back to what people have done to try to stop. Charisma, it seems like you just tried to go cold turkey. But Kristen or Levi, any tricks? Or maybe not even totally stopping, but just trying to like pull it back a little bit. Now that you're a mom, Kristen, I would imagine.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think the first thing I did was I got rid of music. And I know that sounds drastic. Yeah, I haven't listened to music and well, I still listen in the car, but that's like the only place for years now, um, because it's just too
Triggering.
triggering. Yeah, there's nothing I can do if a song comes on. And oh man, that was really hard. That was really hard to kick. It took like 2 years before I was like
Oh,
okay with that.
because it's sad to have to give up music, but I totally get it. You know,
Yeah. And and then I was just like trying making an effort to just be somewhere with people, go to my mom's if I had nowhere else to go, or hang out with a friend, or even on days where I had absolutely nothing going on, just coming up with some excuse to have to go grocery shopping. um
but
getting and then coronavirus ruined all that.
yeah, cool.
But
I can
Feel
imagine it'd
that.
be a lot harder now with coronavirus.
yeah.
Uh,
But it's been so hard, or it is so hard to quit, because one of the things I noticed, like as I really started to curb things, was I got way worse, like as a person. Whatever was underneath, whatever all that was hiding for years, like just came up. I never would have described myself as an anxious person. And now I should probably be seeing a therapist. Like,
mhm.
I've got some issues, apparently. I didn't know I did until I tried to stop daydreaming.
Yeah. I think it's a good question. Is this a coping mechanism for other illnesses, or, we don't know. I mean, frankly, I do, for anyone watching, I'm a big fan of therapy. Whether or not you have this, I sort of feel like everybody can use some therapy. And it is
Mhm.
true that most therapists, since it's not a recognized disorder, they will never have heard of it. But that's okay. You can go to the overcomingtogether.com website or any other website on maladaptive daydreaming, and there's a lot of articles, so you can print out some of those articles, including some peer review journal articles that show people it's a real disorder currently under study. I did some research on it. Dr. Ellie Silmer out of Israel is sort of the world's leading researcher on the topic right now. My colleague, Dr. Daniela Jopp, has done some research, but you can print those articles out and show it to a professional so they at least know what you're talking about. And frankly, if they're not interested in learning, get another therapist, right? If they don't want to do the reading, there are a lot of therapists out there and they're not all equal. Some are better than others. And if they're just like, nope, no such thing, then don't you don't want to deal with them. Levi, we didn't, have you tried anything to stop or limited or anything, or notice that anything in particular
For
works?
me, I I overworked myself. I just had to keep myself busy 24/7. I would wake up at 5 a.m. and I would go to bed at like 11 p.m. I just constantly be doing something. And it didn't even have to be, physical work, but I would be so focused on completing a project or something along those lines, like a design or art project, that I wouldn't allow myself time to daydream. And in return, what that did is that made me a very frustrated person. And, like others have said, they also felt that, well, I also felt that feeling of anger towards everything. I would get so annoyed at the smallest things just because it felt like I was experiencing withdrawal symptoms. Like I could physically feel my body. It was like there was an internal itch which I couldn't, get to.
Yeah.
So yeah, it helped, but it didn't at the end of the day.
Did anyone seek any mental health care or therapy or medication?
I go to therapy.
And
Um,
is
I
that
did. I did tell my therapist. I think I told her a year ago. But lately I've been retouching on it because I feel like we kind of left it on the side for a bit there. But she's been pretty receptive. Like I think, like you said earlier, if you just explain to your therapist, give them articles, like sure, it's not a known disorder on the DSM-5, but that doesn't mean they don't care. Like even like a lot of therapists will work on things that aren't on the DSM. Like family issues and issues with social immigration, whatever your concerns are. So like it's nothing new to them to deal with things that aren't on this one specific manual.
yeah,
So not that it would help, like obviously to get it there, but it's not like just because it's not there doesn't mean you can't get help. And my therapist has been helping me a lot. And I do think that since I've been going to therapy, it's been slowly reducing, but it's still way too slow. I would like to accelerate that because it still hurts my life.
so there's no at this point, since it's just starting to be research, I don't think there's any evidence on treatment, but I do hear from people. So I have
Right.
thoughts, for anyone who's watching about, first of all, I think, what Levi said, just getting as engaged as possible in your own life. And if there's a way you can do it, excuse me, if there's a way you could do it for things, not just work, but if you can find a passion or a hobby, if you're doing something you love, like as a kid, I love theater and acting. And I found that that was one time that I wasn't daydreaming. So it's hard to be daydreaming when you're immersed in your favorite activity. Some people, I'm not, it doesn't work for me, but some people have raved about meditation, where you're focusing on the here and now. I found that medication worked for me. I know a lot of people it did not work for, but some people it does, some people it doesn't. OCD runs in my family, and I would find that like I would have to get a scene exactly right. So again, I want to change the ending of a favorite show or something, and I'd play the ending, but if it wasn't perfect, I would replay it and replay it and replay it, and it was getting frustrating. And the OCD medicine really did, or the OCD medicine was just an SSRI, which is sort of like in the family, not sort of, is in the family of Prozac or Paxil, but I took something called Luvox, which is often given to people with OCD-like type symptoms, and it really did work for me. Again, it doesn't work for everybody, but just something to keep in mind. Again, though, we're parents. I don't think you should be medicating young children, especially if they don't think it's a problem. Going back to the maladaptive daydreaming. For some people, it's not. So there are some possibilities out there, and hopefully in the future there'll be more research because it is difficult. Um, it does. That did bring me though to a thought about there's some things that we seem to all have in common, and then some that are different. Like there's the obvious that I think three of us paced at some point, and Kristen, I don't think you ever paced. Music seemed to be a trigger for everybody. I do notice that social anxiety, some people have, a lot of people with MD have, but I don't have it all. And I think Charisma, you were telling me you don't
Yeah,
have.
I don't have social anxiety, luckily.
Um, some people have OCD, some people don't. I've heard some people with Asperger's who have it, some people don't. So I think there's just a lot of similarities and differences. The similarities is that we all find it difficult to control and find it affecting our lives and somehow. Some people say that it's a result of trauma, but I know people who've have it with childhood trauma and some people who don't. So I think it's just all out there. on the possibilities on that. Anybody have thoughts on any of those things? On like, do we think it coexists with other disorders, or is it something in its own right? Or as Kristen told me beforehand, is that she doesn't even care because it doesn't really matter. She just wants to know how to get rid of it. But I don't know. Any thoughts on any of those like similarities or differences?
I mean, I think it's its own disorder only because of how unique it is. Like the quality of the daydreams and all that. Like that stuff is so unique to this. The only partner is the immersive daydreamers, but they basically the only difference there is that it's not doesn't interrupt with their life. So I definitely think there's something to it not just being just comorbid or part of what I think it's its own thing. But like Kristen's, like it doesn't matter. I just want to find a way to work around it or cope with it or make it a normal part of my life. I don't
Yeah,
care about the official title.
yeah, I agree totally. And my answer is it could be both. Like if you look at something like insomnia, it's
Mm,
its own disorder, but it also happens in depression and anxiety and bipolar. So it could be, but it sometimes scares me on these internet chat rooms. Like someone will be like, I have social anxiety disorder, so maybe it's a part of this, and all these people will say yes, yes, yes. Well, some of us
mm,
don't have that, right?
right.
Some of us don't have childhood trauma, or some of us, I think Dr. Stomer's theory is that some people are just born with a genetic ability. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak for him now that I realize because I could be getting it wrong, but I think I've heard him say that is some people are just born with this genetic ability to daydream in this fashion. For example, I've got two other family members, but if you have other things going on in your life, whether it's trauma, whether it's OCD, then you might be more likely to find it maladaptive.
Mm.
I don't know. Kristen, I spoke for you a little bit before. I didn't mean to do that. But like any any thoughts on any of that or
Yeah, I hear that a lot, that it's a coping mechanism for something else or a symptom of something else. And I don't know, maybe it predates anything I had, though.
yeah,
Like,
I didn't have trauma. I didn't have any disorders as a child. I had a fine childhood, and still happened. I mean, I might have some sort of anxiety now, but I think if it's a coping mechanism for that, it's just by virtue of I happened to have one handy when it developed.
yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think we're all different in that regard.
I mean,
And
I just want to point out that all of us started this, right, at a very young age. So,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I don't know, like, of course, you could always have childhood trauma that's repressed or whatever, but like, how likely is that given
Yeah.
the crowd here?
yeah, exactly. And I think I read a story about like a child in London who was like 2 and they didn't know, she was like talking and moving and she was like 2. What kind of trauma could she have?
Right.
Um, so who knows? Um, what about kind of a different topic? Krishma, I know, has told a therapist, but it sounded like you didn't want to tell your mother. Who has told people in their lives and how have they reacted?
I didn't want to tell my mother.
You said when you were a child, right?
Oh,
When
as a child, yeah, I didn't want to
yeah,
tell her, but I did tell her now. I think I told her 2 months after I told my therapist.
and how did
Um,
that go?
Surprisingly well. I think I was a little irritating at first because she was like, "Oh, it's just you being creative. Don't worry about it." Like you mentioned with your father.
Yeah,
But I think I already had the vocabulary, luckily, to explain what was happening. So I think after talking to her 2, 3 times and really trying to get her on the same page, she's been, receptive to it. She's like, "Oh, okay, so this is a problem, and you're working on it, and we'll figure it out." You know,
that's great.
she's been taking it pretty well.
But any thoughts on why you didn't want to tell her as if when you were a child, like you just had a sense that it was not, when
Well,
she
I think part of it is I didn't want her to think I was wasting time and not studying. Like, as a kid, you want to hide the fact that you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. And I think then eventually, when I came to realization this is a normal, I just didn't want her to feel scared. And also, I didn't want to, her to like send me to a doctor or whatever. Cause like I didn't want it to stop at the time. I didn't realize it was a problem, and I liked it, and I knew this was a normal, but it's like a kid with a toy. I don't want to give that toy away. Um,
yeah,
and then and then after a while, I realized it wasn't normal, and then I just didn't want to tell anybody, including my mother, out of shame. And then once I had that conversation with my therapist, I was like, it's okay to tell.
Yeah.
So it was a slow
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Levi, Kristen, have you told people in your lives? Levi, no, I think you've spoken to your mother.
Yeah. I've spoken to both of my parents. My dad has it as well. I told him that I have these movies playing off in my head, and it's really difficult for me to stop them. And then he told me he has the same, and
Wow.
he absolutely he hates it. He despises it, and the only way he stops himself from not daydreaming is, like I said earlier, what I did is he keeps himself busy all the time, but he doesn't. He's so scared of sort of it getting triggered again that he doesn't even want to read up about it or watch any videos on it or anything, because he just hates it so much. But overall, both my parents were very supportive. They were like, no, we get it. We'll look at the research and whatnot. I spoke to my therapist as well, and she's currently keeping up to date with all the released research and all that type of stuff. And yeah, I mean, my friends, unfortunately, my friends just have this thing in their minds that I'm doing it for attention. So that's sort of the one thing that, we're kind of working towards, is where people don't think that this is just some made up internet thing. It's,
Oh,
it's an actual problem.
yeah. And I said, that's the worst is when you have a problem and people don't believe you. But as I said earlier, like if you haven't lived it, it's just hard for someone to understand. Like a friend of mine once said, and she was trying to be nice. Like I think it was after I wrote the Atlantic article, I was worried if people thought badly about me. She's like, it's like me saying I have a freckle on my skin. Like, why would anyone feel badly? But no, like living with a TV on your head 24/7 is more than a freckle on your skin. But I do, in fairness to those who haven't experienced, it's hard to understand. It's hard to understand the pull of it, if you haven't felt it. Kristen, but I'm so glad that both your parents and Krishma as well, that your mother was supportive. That really is helpful. And my parents are very supportive now too. I think as a kid, they just didn't understand what I was saying. Um, Kristen, how about you?
Yeah, well, I've told my husband, and that went fine. But I think it was Karishma said vocabulary, and I think that's really like the crux of it. Because when I I feel like I tried to tell people when I was a little kid, but I didn't know how to describe it. Like I knew they weren't imaginary friends, and I might be like the only one here, but I never thought of it as daydreaming either. Like when I was Googling like my symptoms and stuff, trying to figure out what was wrong with me, that is not a word I ever searched.
What words did you search?
I searched like world inside my head, and eventually I found the word paracosm, and I started searching that one, and that was the one that finally led me to the term.
And can you define that? What it paracosm to the
I think the definition is pretty close to a detailed imaginary world with history and vastness or whatever, usually created in childhood, that can be sustained for many years.
Like I said, I think it's the word daydreaming that kind of gets us a little bit in trouble. Because I mean, the scientific definition of daydreaming is anything off task. So like thinking about our to-do list is daydreaming.
Yeah.
And some psychologists are like, everybody daydreams. Like, people spend 90% of their day daydreaming. How could you ever daydream too much? And I'm like, wait, this is different. This is
Right.
elaborate world with characters and plots that we just from what we've all said, like there's been issues with work, there's been issues with parenthood, there's been issues with focus and job decisions. So it can have a real impact on your life. Also that's a question I always got, like, well, it doesn't seem to affect you too much, like, especially even when the throes of it. I had friends, I had boyfriends, I was doing well in school, but I never felt really present in the moment, right? Like I was always half listening to my friends, but really wanted to be somewhere else. And even my early boyfriends, I was like, okay, I need to have a boyfriend because I need to look normal, but really I just want everyone to leave me alone so I can go back to my head. Like, so it's not you know, it's bigger than what people think. I feel like I could talk to the three of you forever. Just it's so nice, you know, especially after so many years of really never having anyone to talk to. I could feel like I could go on and on and on. And it just I love speaking to the three of you. But we probably do have to end soon. But I think what I would love to end on is for everybody to maybe give their thoughts on one of two things. If there's someone out there with maladaptive daydreaming, especially maybe like a teenager or something, what hope do you want to give them? Or if there's, you know, a mental health professional, like what do you want them to know? And I think the biggest one too is what parents of like, I mean, I've seen on some of your blogs and chat rooms, some of the parents are like atrocious. Like I've got one 15-year-old told me like her mother forbid her from pacing anymore. Like you can't just forbid someone out of this, right? So I guess what do we want people out there to know, whether it's someone suffering with it, whether it's their parent, whether it's a mental health profession, what word do we want to get out there? Maybe we could just go around. Um, you know, who wants to jump in first? Like for anyone watching, what is the, like if they only watch the last 5 minutes of this or last 10 minutes, what is the most important thing you want them to take from this? Any thoughts on that?
The absolute fear of losing it, because that holds so many people back from trying to get better. Like I never did, even for a few years after I knew it was a problem, I didn't do anything about it. The only thing that motivated me to do something about it was having children. Like, and even then, like I went through Somers doing that treatment thing, and I enrolled in it, and it was like an 8-week thing, and like week 5 was just let the thoughts go, and I had a breakdown, couldn't do it. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. That's where it is. It's so integrated, and you can't just. But I think I would tell the kids or whatever watching that I know how freaky it is, how scary it is, but like it's not gonna go away. It's the immersive daydreaming part is still a part of you no matter what. And you can, I think, at least I hope, there's a way to have both.
And I have both. I think I don't daydream as much, like, I can't do it as much. There are times now I wish I could daydream more, but I can daydream to some degree, but it doesn't control me, right? And that to me is like, I think the best example is in my early 20s when I suffered with it greatly. I live in New York City and I had colleagues and I'd be like, I'd pray that they didn't want to walk home with me to the subway or whatever, because that was precious daydreaming time. And I would always make excuses not to go with them. And when it was finally under control, I was like, wait, I actually wanted them to walk to the subway with me. But if they didn't because they couldn't, then I would still have my daydream world. But my preference would be to be with a real person. So I had it for like, long bus rides or whatever, but my preference was real people. So I did have both, right? Eventually I got to that place. So I hope that, but I think it's important to know that you're never going to go insane. You're never going to lose grip on reality, right? If you haven't just, it's not real. You're not going to fall into an abyss. And maybe there's a way to have it, but also stay in control. Kristen, just tell me a little bit about like what that week 5, was it just thought of having to say goodbye to your characters forever that set you off or was really difficult?
Oh, no, the exercise, I mean, it was a while ago. I can't remember exactly how it was done or anything, but it was, I think it was like just like a meditation technique, just, let the thoughts come in and let the thoughts go out. It was supposed to be nice, a nice, freeing, relaxing experience, but it was not because, my world or whatever, so, booted up. My characters came in and I'm like, all right, I gotta let that go now for a few minutes. And I can't even describe it. It was just like, I don't know, sending my baby away or something, I would.
Yeah. You thought you were maybe losing these characters. Have been a part of your life.
Losing, like absolute betrayal.
Yeah.
Like I can't do that. I can't.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Levi? Charisma, either what thoughts for others?
Um, so I guess, I mean, I agree with Christy 100%. If I wanted to tell something to people who don't have it, but some friend or child is telling them to like about it, I would say don't. I think this applies to almost any mental disorder. Like depression is like, one advice that I think I always get is it's just in your head, just let it go. It's fine. And it's like, stop. Please don't say that to somebody who comes to you with that, because it's not that simple. Because if it was that simple, they would have already done it. If they're coming to you, they're at that stage where they want to do something about it, right? Or at least they know it's a problem. So if they could just, completely stop pacing or stop listening to music or stop XYZ, they would have done it.
Yes,
It would have already been done,
yes,
So
yes, yes, yes.
please be understanding and please listen rather than try to go in there immediately fix it, because it's not going to happen.
Yeah. The listening is the best they can do, and being willing to like do the research and like to try to get understanding, and don't for like you can't forbid someone out of it. I had one
Right.
parent calling me like, we're just going to tell them not to do it. Like, yeah, good luck with
No.
it. It's not, it's not going to work. It needs help. Levi, any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually, for me, it's more towards the medical and mental health professionals. I've worked on the ambulance a lot, and there's this really big problem in hospitals or in the medical field where professionals, they don't listen to their patients. And as mental health professionals and medical professionals, you have to put that. I This is going to sound really mean, but ego kills, right? You have to put that ego aside and say, maybe I don't have all the answers, and maybe there are things that I don't know. The first rule of medicine is first do no harm, and that means that you cannot tell your patient that you know more about, yeah, or no, rather, let me rephrase that. You cannot tell your patient that what they're feeling isn't real, or what they're feeling is imaginary or something like that. You cannot just dismiss them like that. Just listen for a while, try to do some research on this, and maybe you'll, I don't know, turn out to help someone who desperately needs that help. That's the point of being in the medical field, is to help people. So yeah, that's
That
basically
is music to my ears. In fact, it's the
me.
entire point of my Overcoming Together website, because not after David Daydreaming, I don't know if the three of you know this, but this is actually one of 3 times in my life where doctors were like, didn't believe me. They're like, there's no such disorder. They would show me the DSM. There's no such thing. Daydreaming can never be a bad thing. And I'd be like, later, years later, I showed them all the internet sites. And they were like, oh, that's not scientific. That's anecdotal. I went back to like grad school. I'm like, okay, I get that it's anecdotal evidence, but when thousands upon thousands of people on the internet are saying they have something, that means you need to research it. You need to get out of your journal articles and
Yeah.
start listening to your patients. And that's happened several times in my life. So Levi could not have said that better. But I do think it's really important for anybody out there who suffers with this. You are not alone. I really do believe that bright and creative people around the world are experiencing this. Getting on some of the chat rooms and websites will help you feel less alone. And people do trade tips of not that there's no scientific evidence of what works yet, but people trade tips of what has worked for them and what hasn't. So check out all of that. All 3 of you have sites. I mean, I'm going to try to get them. We got Mad Arts. Rishma, tell me yours again.
Trapped in daydreams.
Captain Daydreams, and Kristen, you've got a few. You got one on Reddit. You've got
Oh, well, yeah. I help run the subreddit, which is our Maladaptive Dreaming. No day.
and, and for
the
parents, yeah,
yeah.
for parents checking these out, it just, even though they're not all the answers, it shows you care if you bother to do some research and look into it. And no, you're not. It might be a struggle your whole life, but you're not going to fall into like the abyss of insanity. And it may, there may be cures and treatments in the future, and the future might be bright. So thank you so much. This was just, again, if I could go back in time and tell the younger version of me that this would have happened, that there are other people who understand me, I can't, I don't think that younger me would even believe that it was possible. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think there might be some more conversations in our future. So thank you all.
Have a good day.